Hello, movie lovers. Welcome home. My name is Amy Henserling, and you are listening to Watch This List. Today's episode is of She Said with myself and the delightful Jenna Ipcar, who is inspiring to me because she is actually making a living, sort of, right, Jenna, off of her creative endeavors and interests. So, Jenna, before we get into our films, I would like you to tell everyone just how cool you are and what are some of the things that you're doing podcast wise and just like passion wise.
Well, thank you very much. Yes, I am amazing. No, I'm kidding.
You are.
Well, I do appreciate the compliment. It's I'm not making a living doing film criticism, unfortunately, but I do film criticism, and that is Cinema 60. You can find me on, which is my podcast with my co-host Bart, who we just talk about 1960s cinema, which is, you know, it's just amazing for us. It's the kind of thing where we're like, no one has to listen to this. We'll just keep doing it.
I understand.
We love it so much.
Yeah.
And then I also have Back Row, which I run with three other people. My co-founder, Veronica Dolginko, and we have Carlo, we have Dan, who are the Crud Buddies. And that's just a great little website. It's for more contemporary movies. We also have a podcast there. You can find that on cinema60.com and back-row.com. Fun sites.
Fun stuff. And you are a graphic designer. So you designed these sites, which are gorgeous. I'm very jealous of your skills if you can't pick that up right now. And I think also that it's interesting that the film that you picked for us today is not in the 60s, because I thought for sure that might be something that you would do, but you went 1975 instead.
I did, which is, it is funny. As much as I love the 60s so much, I think probably my favorite is that new Hollywood early 70s, like late 60s kind of stuff is like ends up being my personal, like the stuff that really resonates with me when I like find a movie that I adore. But I decided to torture you a little bit by choosing Seven Beauties, which is 1975 and directed by Lina Wertmüller.
Which I had never heard of, and now I have. I have to give a shout out to Sakana because she loves this director, I think. I mean, I read her review of Seven Beauties and then also a couple of others that this director has done. Lina is very interesting. Just like reading about her, even like just a shallow view. And especially what I think she was doing with this film, which to me, what's the most interesting about it in the fact that you chose it is that you chose it when upon the criteria of like, womanhood, like that's where it was like, I'm watching this thing and I'm like, how did Jenna, what was your thinking as far as doing it for this expressive purpose? I understand why you did it like as a film, but why for this particularly?
So it's sort of a long answer. I would say that, the thing that I really love about Wertmüller's filmmaking is the fact that she's sort of not afraid to lean into difficult themes and difficult characters. Like nobody in her movies is ever wholly good or wholly evil, even when they're like god awful people that are doing something that's like unforgivably cruel.
Yeah.
But there's an inherent like duality in her. And I kind of interpret that, as basically her lived experience. It's like her sort of battling with the inner male gaze that she has inside of her. Because I think that's like, to me, a weirdly defining characteristic of being a woman is the fact that, it's impossible to exist in society and not have the male gaze baked into you. Whether, you're a man or not, everyone has it because it's just so ever present. It's in every movie. It's in every television show, literature, advertising, politics, social dynamics. It's frustrating. It's the type of thing that, that's why feminism happened, basically. And there's a good quote by John Berger, who is a novelist and art critic and obviously also a man. But this quote is basically like, men look at women, but women watch themselves being looked at. And to me, that's like, that's the core struggle at the heart of a lot of the Wertmüller filmmaking style, I guess I would say, because she always sort of is indulging in these horrible men. And I feel like it's the same way to me. It's the same way that people watch horror movies to distract themselves from the worst things in the world. It's like she's trying to process, I think, a lot of this like toxicity by indulging in it. And it's almost like, for at least for me, it's an exorcism almost to, have this to like become this horrible male character, to like get inside of his skin and walk around and be the top dog for once. Like, it's not the same as an endorsement, but like if I go back to the things that I find the funniest, it's usually like becoming this kind of just like asshole guy.
Despicable guy.
Right.
Well, right. Well, and I think I read that somewhere that this was like sort of also a response to like the Fellini idea of like this machismo, like this macho guy or this protagonist who's like a womanizer but is cool, So taking that down in terms of like making him think he's cool, right? And like, like have all this swagger and acting, and none of it's real at all. It's completely unfounded and it's not true, but he's still, him as a character believes that about himself, and then behaves just so antithetically to that entire idea, that I think she's also saying like, look at what this actually looks like in terms of if you match the person's actions with how they perceive themselves and how they think they're coming across.
Yeah, totally. It's funny, Fellini, like you say that and I'm like, yeah, absolutely. That's 100% Fellini. But the one thing I'll say for me is that I've always really liked the way that Fellini, even though he indulges every single whim all the time, and that's like his whole thing, there's always a humility to it, I think. And so like I've never really walked away from a Fellini movie, even like in comparison to say, and I love Scorsese, but like Wolf of Wall Street to me is just like the most indulgent of indulgent
Excess.
stuff. And yeah, and like sure, at the end he kind of turns the camera on the viewer and he's like, it's you all along, and you're like, fuck
okay,
off. But like but like Fellini, I feel like there's something that he gets to something that's a little more universal in a weird way, that it is through that male lens. Like you have to, conform to being like, even watching like City of Women, which is like his most indulgently and arguably sexist film. But, there is something about just like, being surrounded by the thing that you're just like lusting after, like, or even like 8.5 with a fantasy sequence where it's all of the women of his life. And he's like, they're all waiting on him hand and foot, and he has like a whip, and then they turn on him in the end. And I'm like, yeah, like, women think about that stuff too, right? Like there is a degree of like, we all kind of tokenize people. We sort of take people for granted. And then at least Fellini has enough self-awareness to be like, and this isn't good. He always sort of acknowledges that like I'm fully indulging myself, and it's fine. Whereas like, yeah, like Wertmüller, I feel like she's more like she's just going for the throat, like
yes. And she's also, I think, touching on like hypocrisy and also I mean there's a lot of themes in this movie, and a lot of ways that he gets humiliated. And I think it also is a little bit testing our ability to empathize, because it's challenging to feel bad for him, even when he's in like, obviously a concentration camp in World War II is like the absolute worst thing you could think. And to not feel sorry for someone who was in one, I'm like, bravo, like you achieved something quite amazing there. So, but go ahead and set this up for us, Jenna. Tell us what this movie's about. just on the surface, and then that way people have an idea, because it's not really one that's like super popular.
Yeah, well, I mean, this was for what it's worth, it was I think the first
at the time.
Yeah, at the time it was the first movie she was the first female director to be nominated for Best Director from the Academy Awards. And so this movie made a huge splash at the time, especially in America. It really made her name, and she became like as well known as Fellini, I think, for a few minutes, for a couple of years there. But anyhow, the plot of this movie is that we have a small-time crook named Pasqualino Sette Bellezze, who
Good job.
is I studied Italian for 7 years. That's all I can do is just vaguely pronounce the names like with a bad American accent. But he's from Naples, and his whole life is just revolves around masculine posturing. That's just all he does. And when he realizes that his older sister has fallen in love with a local pimp who's making her put on these sort of like salacious little cabarets for men, he flips out. Pasqualino flips out, and he decides to go after this guy. He beats the crap out of his sister, and he says, if you ever go near this guy again, and then he threatens him and all of this. So but he's basically all talk, Pasqualino, and but that said, he owns a gun, and he mistakenly ends up actually killing the guy, and he gets thrown in jail. And then he is forced to lawyer up, and the lawyer tells him that he has to plead insanity or else he's going to get the chair or whatever.
Yeah, and that he really should have planned this better. That like the lawyer is so shady. He's like, if you had just like put the gun in his hand and made it look like self-defense, you would have been fine and you wouldn't have had to do anything. And he's just like, I was so, I didn't have enough time to do it. It reminds me of a Coen Brothers movie in a way, not like a drama that they do, but like a comedy where everything just goes wrong and this person is in like one ridiculous circumstance after another, but like fumbling their way through. But yeah, that everybody's kind of crooked in this movie. There's not really necessarily a good guy.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And
yeah.
From there he gets, he pleads insanity. He gets put into a mental institution, an asylum, basically. It looks terrible. And he gets the choice job of cleaning bedpans in the women's ward until he goes and rapes a woman who he finds tied to her bed in a truly horrific scene. Where he then, gets caught eventually and sent to get electroshock therapy. And then he finds out that the only way that he can get out of this institution is to volunteer for the Italian army, which he does for all of 5 minutes. And then he deserts and gets captured by German soldiers and thrown into a concentration camp where after witnessing all of these atrocious horrors, he decides that the only way to get out is to try and seduce this like female Nazi officer, this guard who's like as tough as nails, vindictive, dead-eyed bruiser of a woman. And that's that movie.
Jenna's comfort film.
Yeah.
Really pleasant experience. Jenna, if you knew me better, I'm glad that you had no idea how I would respond to this, because I was like, this is going to be very interesting because I would normally have not made it through and I had to for you. And so this was what's the hard part about it is that I could not figure out what it was saying. I think that was the difficult thing, because like when it was done and I read about it and, read some interviews, read Sakana's review, which was great, and my friend Rob's, which was great. Brian Formo's was great. It was like, okay, I'm getting context a little bit more. I can understand where she's coming from, but as just a film experience, I feel like it's a little bit difficult to grasp what it is that we're meant to be pondering. I don't know if you feel that way as well, or if it was more like obvious to you what it was trying to get at.
No, this is like a wildly difficult film.
Okay, good.
I mean, I will say that upon a rewatch, kind of knowing what to expect, there's a little less of the shock factor. And so you do get more of a chance to kind of sit back and look at what's happening. But, to me, this movie it's just like an anti-everything film. It's just anti-Italy, it's anti-German, it's anti-war, it's anti-sympathy. It's like, it's just it's a true celebration of everything at its worst. And there is this idea of anarchy, that like our only hope and the only way through what we have is, by embracing disorder. There's a whole scene in the concentration camp where one of his fellow Italian prisoners says, and it was a bit more of a thoughtful, in a prisoner of, a political prisoner, and he says, a man in disorder is our only hope. And I think that ends up being kind of the cinching thing for this movie. But that's not a satisfying answer, because I'm saying that like the answer is anarchy, the answer is nothing, like the answer is everything and nothing all at once. And it's this sort of I don't know. It's a truly difficult movie. And the fact that it was so popular, I think, is kind of awe-inspiring in a weird way. And I think that that's a credit to her filmmaking, in the fact that you can watch this and you can laugh, whether you did or not. A lot of stuff is really, I would say that this is a comedy, in as much as it's like a bizarre film that it tonally whiplashes you left and right.
Well, and I think that too, the part of this that made me think that it had that female component to it, where I could latch onto something and say, oh, this is a fresh insight, this is something I don't normally think about, is with the Nazi officer, after one of the worst sex scenes I've ever witnessed, in terms of it just being, it may be like the most unerotic, I think Foremost said this, Brian said, like the most unerotic consensual sex scene of all time. It's truly just like, ugh. And then you kind of get this glimpse inside of his head. He's like very, very desperately trying to think of anything that would turn him on, because he knows that if he's not into this thing, there's going to be consequences. But the pressure. Anyways, she says afterwards, as he's like on the ground like a dog, like eating food, that, it's disgusting to her what people will do just to survive. So the whole theme of like survival and that like clinging to aliveness, but completely sacrificing any shred of dignity that you may have, makes it so that your life is pretty worthless. And yet, like, there's characters in this film that don't care that their life has no meaning. They just have to live. That's a very interesting phenomena, and that is articulated by really the only intelligent woman in this movie, to me, where she's actually contemplating things, even though she herself is, like you said, kind of dead inside. But at least she has some sort of grasp on what could the quality of life be in this situation, even though she's judging it.
Totally. And I think that isn't there something, and maybe this is a me problem, but like, isn't there something weirdly like female about that message too? And like, I feel like, women all the time are kind of made to, are forced into boxes they don't want to be in. And so like, even this movie, at the beginning of this movie, one of the first scenes, because it's told out of order, but the first flashback, actually, and I correct myself, but the first flashback we see is this, his sister on stage dancing for all of these men, and they're all laughing at her. She is not, none of the women in this movie really have like a traditional body type, and so she's just looks like a normal woman, but like, to see that on screen is almost shocking in itself. And you can definitely argue that, like, I mean, it's on purpose. For Mueller, definitely she plays into some like fat phobic stuff for sure, and especially in other movies. But anyhow, it's still there, which I think is interesting. But this first scene is that all of these men that are calling, they're heckling her, and they're like telling her to take her clothes off while they're calling her ugly, and just being absolutely awful to her. And then one of the last scenes of this movie is Pasqualino being humiliated sexually in the exact same way, but by one woman who has arguably, even more control over his specific life. But the pressure is pretty much the same in a lot of ways, like obviously there's life and death, but it's the same thing with women, like some guy catcalling you on the street could also be some guy that's going to come after you and make your life hell,
And there's that dichotomy of like, that it's a catch-22 where you either got the side where you're not desired and you're not the right body type and you're not the traditional whatever. And then you have the other side of, but if you are, you could get murdered, or you could get, there's consequences for that are arguably scarier, but both sides are things that people have to grapple with.
Totally.
Like as a woman, it's like, well, which would you rather be, really? Like someone who, and also I have to say too, that the scene where she's dancing and they're saying all this stuff reminded me of how I think a lot of times men, especially in film, like are under this pressure to be turned on or attracted to a certain type of woman, and they themselves may not even feel that way. But there's like this groupthink sort of thing where it's like if I'm a man, then I have to like this certain thing. And even if I secretly am into this, like if somebody were secretly into the way she looked in that show, they still have to join all the other men who are like down on her. So that's something else I often think about, like how we don't, male or female, sort of allow ourselves to be attracted to what we want, because there is this societal pressure to conform, whether it's in what you look like or what you like other people to look like.
Totally. I mean, and even one of the things I really like about Seven Beauties too is the way that Pasqualino, for all of his machismo, like he has no scenes of actual masculinity in front of men. It's all performative. True. And it's all, every time he's with women, when he's in a crowd of women, he abuses them. He, insults them. He slaps their asses. He beats the crap out of his own sisters. And when he's in front of guys, he's made a fool pretty much every single time. He has absolutely no power until that big switch at the end, even when the woman then is also holding the power. I mean, but then again, it's like, here's a guy that, and also in all of his flashbacks, he loves his mother. He was raised by his mother. There's no father in sight. Everything he knows, he learned from his mother, even how to treat women. He gets it in his head that all women want, all they want is love, which is why he gets obsessed with, well, I'll seduce this woman because deep down inside, she's still a woman. And, she's still, if I can make her attracted to me, even though I'm ugly, which he also admits, he says he's ugly, though. Come on, Giancarlo Giannini, he's adorable. Not. But
yeah,
he has these big cow eyes. I love him. But
yeah,
anyhow, he still like thinks like, this is it. This is the way my way out is by, playing into how to, trick a woman, which was taught to him by his mother, and as if only women want love, as if that's like somehow an inherently female desire.
Well, and also that I think maybe, I can't remember where I heard this from, but it was like one of the great masculine fears is not being needed, not being necessary. And so that maybe that clinging to that idea provides some sort of solace, because it's like, if women don't need you and they can get a job and work and do all these other things that have absolutely nothing to do with you, then it's like, well, what's the point? Like, what am I here for? And that's an odd thing, because I think usually that tendency is attributed to females, like when women are clingy and needy and, sort of the Jane Austen thing where all they want is to be married and to find the one and to get out of the house. But it's kind of flipped culturally almost at this point, I feel like, where women are really empowered and going after what they want and considering the fact that maybe that's not the end all be all of life, and that maybe is a frightening thing actually for men.
I mean, I like too that there's that scene with when he's trying to pump himself up to have sex with this Nazi woman, where he kind of says to her as he's like crying and he's like desperate to try and get through to her, and he says like, you kill out of a sense of duty. He's like, but you're a victim, and he's sort of saying this again with this idea that there's a real woman under that uniform that that I can caress, but he's also kind of hitting on a truth there, right? Like he's milking it for his own needs, but everyone's a bit of a victim of society in a lot of ways, which is, I think, where then that idea of anarchy kind of comes in, and about kind of breaking free and finding yourself and making a choice. Though I think Wertmüller's sense of anarchy is sort of is pretty strange, and also I would say quite Italian.
Right.
It's more reactive, and it's a bit more there isn't a lot of, I don't know, there's not a lot of effort. It's like more reactive, I guess, is maybe what I'm thinking of.
Yeah, and I have to say the beginning of this movie, like the oh yeah. I don't know how many times they say it, but oh yeah. But the beginning it has that spirit of what you're talking about. It just seems totally reactionary. Against what? I'm not entirely sure. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Hiroshima Mon Amour, in the sense that the beginning is just kind of like a lot of images that you're supposed to be feeling something, and they're kind of intense and visceral. And you've got this voiceover narration aspect that's trying to get you to react. It feels quite provocative, but you're not entirely sure what the hell's going on.
I mean, I fully agree with you. And I don't even know if I've wrapped my head around that opening, because I just kind of love it so much. It's just so funny to me. And I think there is, but I think you're right that it does, it sets a tone essentially. And it's very much like, to all of the, like, holding up a glass and a toast to, cause it goes from everything from like to the people that are, dealing with minor inconveniences to like the people that should have been shot in their cradle because they grew up to be such horrible people like Mussolini or Hitler.
And then it shows Hitler, right? And then you get the visual. So you're like, whoa! Like, how did we get from, He's also just seems to be trying to identify every type of person in the world: the people who don't believe in war, the people who fight in the war, the people who, just want to be here and use the resources and die, and then the people that it's like trying to cover. Almost like how Tree of Life starts at the beginning and tries to like show, creation happening, or adaptation also does that. But in this way, it's like different people's personalities or ideologies. This
is like, it's like this is almost, it's a hate film. It's not like a hate film in that it's bigoted, but it's a hate film in that it really is like a sort of a toast to the worst of humanity, and in I think every level of that, like from the people that are so passionate that they gatekeep people out of making a change, to the people that are actively working against humanity and trying to make things horrible, and like there is, I would say that it's a bit more pessimistic or negative than
nihilistic.
Yeah, nihilistic. Yeah. That's the right word than maybe my personal view of the world is. But I do really get a kick out of it. I don't know. I think, like, again, it's like there's something. It's like watching horror films. It's like, indulging in the thing that just, it frustrates me so much. So it's like I want to roll around in it.
It's almost like exposure therapy, Jenna.
Maybe.
I feel like you're like somebody who's afraid of rats, and so you're like hanging out in places where they're caged, but you're near them. I don't know. Not in an effort to be like understanding of it, just to be desensitized maybe to its potency, so that it's not so, because the power that it has is in part of the power that it has is that we believe it does. So if you can sort of watch these things in a detached manner almost, then perhaps it loses some of its militancy. Like it can't affect you as much if you just laugh at it.
Yeah, I think that's totally part of it. I think that's, I can spend all night being angry and frustrated about how somebody treated me, or by the news, or by, anything, most things out there. Or I can laugh at it, and I definitely, personally, I love comedy. I love humor, and I find everything funny, even that, like, I'm the kind of person who, when the worst possible thing has happened to me, I will still be laughing in a sort of gallows humor way about it, whether or not, it's like maybe not in the exact moment, but like give me like a couple minutes to a couple days, and I probably can come up with something that's funny about this situation. And so that's definitely how I personally process the world, and there's something to that. But as you said, is it my comfort? Not really.
Well, and you're reminding me, there's a great Stephen Colbert quote where he says, like, you can't laugh and be afraid at the same time.
Right.
So that's what I'm saying. There's something to the healing power of being able to laugh, because you're stripping the thing that you're afraid of its power a little bit, I think.
Sorry, but like Colbert is a really interesting comparison to Wertmüller.
Ah, how so?
His sort of Colbert Report persona.
Yeah, that's what I used to watch all the time.
Because it was
Colbert
amazing.
Report.
And like, that's, the way that great. He would just, lean into it. It was always like, yes, like, everything's horrible, and this is also true. And, it unmasks a lot of these guys. It's like suddenly you can see exactly how they think, and then you start to realize what's even effective against them. And I think that for Wertmüller, who has always been pretty political in her filmmaking, I would say every movie that I've seen of hers, though I haven't seen all of them, but every movie is ties back to her politics in some way, even if it's not, if it's not a movie that's like rah, go out there and further this cause. It's definitely has a political, socioeconomic, there's something, gender, anything. It's always tying back to her more kind of like left-wing politics, and yet she's always hyper focusing on these like right-wing, bullies and evil people. And like, so that, yeah, like I think Colbert is actually a really interesting, if not great, version, because I think one of the things about Colbert, though, not to get off topic, but that I remember there's interviews where he was saying that, like that he has like obviously all of these like left-wing fans, but apparently he had right-wing fans too, who thought that he was just, that's who he was. And they were like, believed it.
Not like a parody.
Yeah.
Right. Like, yeah, like Larry David in Curb. He's like, I'm not that bad, guys. But, you can, they do such a good job that you kind of think, oh, this is who they are.
Totally.
Like, not just a character. I totally agree. And you are also, in the way that you're describing the politics of it, it kind of reminds me, this movie actually does remind me of Town Bloody Hall. Did you ever watch that movie?
No.
It's a documentary where a lot of feminists, I think it was in the 70s, are like on a panel with Norman Mailer. And it is great. You should check it out. And it's like tons of women versus Norman Mailer, basically. And I mean, he was,
great guy. Stand up.
A tough guy who is quite cocky. And so he loved it. Any other man, I would feel sorry for them to be in that scenario. Cause I think like Susan Sontag is there, and Gertrude Steinemann. Like there's tons of like famous people in this documentary where they just decided to film this. That was an actual meeting or whatnot. But anyway, that's what this made me think of, is like Seven Beauties is a man at the center. There's women everywhere, but it isn't about women being able to influence this person, change this person, speak to this person. Short of his mother, the only thing he's got is this kind of anime level delusion of self-confidence, where he just keeps charging forward. He kills, he rapes, he seduces, he's a liar, he's a thief. And it doesn't matter because to him, all he's trying to do is get through it and survive. And I don't know. It's an interesting journey, Jenna. And yeah, totally funny.
I mean, it's Wertmüller herself is kind of an interesting character because she never identified, and she in fact pointedly said that she was not a feminist. But to me, you can't watch these movies and not see feminism in them to some degree. Even again, I think that she is, I think she's sort of fat phobic, or at least would indulge in the humor of showing bigger bodies, especially in sex scenes in movies. But I mean, it's not like she invented it. You know what I mean? And so there's a part of her where I think by her saying she's not a feminist, I think that's naive personally. But, this idea that you can be a great director without that being gendered, as if there's a standard that exists that's separate from what's been preset by men. You know what I mean? There's no possible.
That's kind of like what Julia, I can't remember her last name. The Raw director.
Oh, yeah.
Director. She said that too, that she is a female director and she hates that she's always referred to as a female director instead of a director.
I mean,
but it's just kind of we're not at a place where culturally that she would be just referred to as director. It's female. It's definitely a female director. And then on top of which, if you are coming out with this sort of material that is shocking in sort of a body horror way or a sexual way, then it's even more emphasized. The gender is even more highlighted depending on the content.
Totally. There's no objective way to evaluate a great director that isn't pre-pulling from this preordained list of male greats. You're and so I don't know. That's almost its own topic in a way. But
I was gonna say.
I was going to just say real quick was just that I think that what I do like about her brand of, I'm going to call it feminism, is that it isn't afraid to show things at their worst, and it isn't afraid to show both men and women at their worst. And so she's never shying away from the way that things are. As horrible as Pasqualino is, he's really not that crazy, there's you mentioned when he has to flash back to all the women he's ever had a sexual encounter with in order to get it up, basically. And half of them are him raping or assaulting a woman, and it's unfortunately, and so I kind of, part of me, and maybe this is me being a bit of a contrarian in a way, but not that I am desperate for more rape scenes on film, because there's so many of them. But I will say that when I see even the rape scene in this movie, it never does the camera focus on her chest. Never is the camera it's always close-ups on faces. And if you even see a naked body, it's almost this sort of detail off to the side. It's never this it's never I always hate especially in the 70s, does this all the time with the winking nod to the men. It's just hey guys, here's a little cut for you. Okay, now back to the story. And you're another one where I'm just go F yourself, it's so obnoxious. And she never ever does stuff like that. And I appreciate that quite a bit about her. I think there's arguments you can make about how she portrays large women bodies. That's definitely not flattering and definitely leans into humor where it doesn't need to, or there's nothing funny about it. But I don't know, the way that she leans into that kind of the horrible maleness, I think is always pretty self-aware.
Well, and what made me choose the second film is that so Jenna emailed me a list of the movies that she was thinking about. And the first bracket was, how did you phrase this, Jenna? It was seeing women through men, right? That was your
Yeah,
first
through like
chunk. It was
terrible
like
men.
through terrible men. And then the second was movies where the female lead is sort of encapsulating the female experience, or like how women move through the world, but in a sort of dangerous way. So I picked In the Cut. This is a movie that I've loved for a long time by Jane Campion from 2003. And this movie, after seeing it after Seven Beauties, made me a lot more aware of the danger aspect of it, because this movie, literally, I think every frame feels there's two things going on, in my opinion. I'll see if you agree with me. One, that a woman could be killed at any time and randomly, arbitrarily, for nothing that she did, just because the world is dangerous. And then two, that the women in the movie are fearless for some inexplicable reason. And it's almost an otherworldly level of bravery, because I feel like Meg Ryan's character and Jason Lee's character go into situations where I would be very afraid, and they have no fear, none. So it's a very, very interesting movie to me, atmospherically, because of their attitudes.
Totally. There's so many times in this movie I had the same reaction to you. Like, as someone who was even like born and raised in New York City, I'm like, there's no way in hell I would have walked into that room.
No way. And they are like wearing, they're wearing very sexy clothes the whole movie. Like they're wanting attention, and they're still quite feminine the whole time, and they're putting themselves in these like dark alleyways, quite literally, and like it's nothing. And I mean, I don't know whether to admire it or to think that it's just naive.
I think I mean, for In the Cut, well, this was really interesting, I will say, to watch with Seven Beauties. I actually saw more parallels than I ever realized that there were. But
yes,
In the Cut is definitely more of like a fable, I think. It like kind of, there's a bit more unreality about it, even though I think that it gets into quite a bit that is very real. But there's a lot of things where you're like, in real life, this would never fly, you know?
Right. It kind of reminds me of Little Red Riding Hood, actually, where she's thinking that she's completely safe and pretty bold. And meanwhile, the wolf is in the grandma. It's kind of that feeling of like, you as the audience are like, please don't go in there. Please don't walk downstairs. The bathroom's upstairs. What are you doing still standing there watching this happen? Like, but then it's also tapping into that secret desire aspect that I think is very female, where we're like curious and sort of, we appear a certain way on the outside, and then maybe we would stand there and watch. I don't know. That sort of thing is very interesting too.
I love In the Cut because to me it's like asking the question of like, what if the thing, what if, as if this isn't the truth, the thing that you're most attracted to, wants to kill you, and like that is unfortunately, and I'm not saying, I mean, again, like it's not like every woman is innocent and every man is evil, like 100%.
Oh, no.
But,
No.
this idea, I don't know, like whenever, I don't know about you, but whenever I'm in a situation with like a bunch of women and, I just need like a topic to talk about, we don't know each other, I feel like there's three things that I can talk about that are always a hit. And like one of them is like, what are you watching on TV or whatever? One of them is like just bitching about your period. And the other one's just murder. I mean, like straight up, when you're just like kidnapping, stalking, like anything, like women are always down to talk about those three things because we think about it all the time.
Jenna, I don't know who your friends are. No, I'm just kidding. I think that you have a point in terms of, I was just talking to my friend who is female, about true crime and how a lot of women listen to like very unsettling, grotesque things quite easily. I don't know. Are you thinking that there's a correlation between morbid curiosity and the fact that we sort of experience this on a micro level, or are you just like, what do you think that interest suggests or
I think
reveals
it's
or
I think it's
implies?
familiarity. I think that like women are very used to um looking at themselves as prey. You know what I mean? I think it's a
Mm,
common female experience. And I think some women try and twist that into something that's maybe more positive. But either way, it's sort of still there, you know? And again, like, it's not
yeah.
that, like, it's not just about women totally, but, you know, men, there's plenty of men who suffer at the hands of other men all the time. And obviously, there's evil and abusive women out there. But I do think that women can sometimes are seeing more often the worst of humanity in a way that I don't think that many men are privy to. And so,
And there's also the fear aspect too of like, I even thought this the other day when I was walking to my car at night and I saw a woman in the parking lot, and I thought, "Oh, I'm glad that was a woman," and there was no reason for me to think that. Like, it looking at, like, I'm walking to my car at night and I see someone walking to their car, I have a completely different reaction if it's a woman or if it's a man at night. And it's not that necessarily that I actually am thinking this through, or that I think that something would happen to me just because it's a man. It's not that, but there is some sort of thing like, "Oh, I'm glad that that's a woman walking to her car." And so, yeah, I guess on a very primal level, this, you feel this for some
well, you know,
reason.
what was that thing that was going around, you know, Twitter that was like, would you rather be alone in the woods with a man or a bear? And everyone was choosing the bear.
Because they said it, because if it was a bear, at least everyone would believe them.
Yeah.
They would believe that they were attacked.
I mean, and also I think like I have more trust for a bear than I do some random dude, unfortunately. And I
That's
have
what I'm,
many
yeah.
male friends, I'll say. I'm also, you know, like, but I even like my relationship the first year of you know, dating my you know, my boyfriend, like, I think I asked him if he was going to murder me, like, maybe like once a month.
Well, and I mean, Jenna, my friend Allison, I hate to blast her right now, but she's like on dating apps right now. And we had like a 45-minute conversation last night about this crazy situation. I won't even get into it, although it is fascinating what this guy did. The links that this guy went to match with her. But I'm just saying, when dudes are um let's say accustomed to rejection in this area, they are kind of frightening. And I was like, you need to like make sure that these people cannot find you on other social media and come after you, because that sort of stuff is, I'm not saying that women don't do those things, but I am saying that when men do them, I don't know, it just seems more potentially terrifying to me, and it's scary.
Isn't it interesting in the cut, like Kevin Bacon's character, right? Who is the
Mhm.
spurned ex-lover that just keeps stalking her and showing up everywhere. You know, he's quick to anger. That one really terrifying scene where he's just in her apartment after she broke up with him. You know, like that stuff gives me such anxiety. But then there's like scenes where Jennifer Jason Leigh as her sister, where she talks about straight up stalking a doctor. And she's
I
like,
know. And then having a restraining order
yeah.
against
And
her.
it's so funny because
Right.
I listened to that and I sort of, and that's part of what I love about this movie is that like it shows you the menace of that. And then these are all people who the sister herself identifies as a romantic. And this is what we've defined romance as in media, right? Is this idea of like, you know, they said no, but I know deep down they mean yes. And so that's a constant push. But like if a woman does it, it seems somehow less threatening between the, you know, in the conversation that they're having. But like her actions are no different than the Kevin Bacon character, you know?
You're
And
right.
he's not even violent, at the end of the day. We don't
Right.
see him doing anything. I mean, yeah, there's red flags, but like he's not doing anything illegal, right? Like, so there's nothing that, I mean, no, he even has the key. There's questionably legal, but like, it's, I don't know, it's kind of the same thing. And I think that I like that in the cut acknowledges there's the creepiness, I think, in both men and women, and the creepiness in romance and the creepiness in love. And the way that even like Seven Beauties, the idea that all women want is love is basically what the serial killer is doing, right? So that was kind of interesting.
You're totally right. And I think you're right about also that both movies are sort of inviting the audience to contemplate their own natural reactions, because in the cut, we judge Kevin Bacon immediately right off the bat, like what a weirdo, like I like get him away, like we're so, you know, removed from this guy and judgmental. And then when Jennifer Jason Leigh is talking about stalking that guy and being crazy, Meg Ryan has total sympathy for her, doesn't see anything wrong with it. And then we don't, because we're like, oh, well, she's a little crazy, but she deserves love too. So you're right. There is this sort of double standard dichotomy that isn't fair at all. And I didn't think about that at the time, but maybe it's because the worst thing that Jennifer Jason Leigh could do is make 11 appointments in a week versus Kevin Bacon could actually kill her. I think it's because maybe the consequence, I'm not talking about like Fatal Attraction. I mean, there's exceptions to this, but the consequence of a woman engaging in this behavior seems, generally speaking, less dire, maybe. So we're not perhaps as harsh on it, even though, like you're saying, we probably should be, because they're pretty equal. They just manifest
I
differently.
mean, I think it's like, he's more threatening just because we know statistically that men are.
Right. And because he seems mentally,
yeah. Question. Well, he's a doctor too,
Yeah.
right? Or he's studying to be one or something.
Or he's a doctor in a soap
Right.
opera, wasn't it that?
But yeah. I mean, the other interesting parallel I realized was that they both include these sex scenes. I do love the line in the cut where I think it's also Jennifer Jason Leigh says that, every guy I've slept with, I remember them based on how they like to do it, but not how I like to do it, which then, later Meg Ryan has this scene with Mark Ruffalo, which unfortunately I find very attractive, but where basically, she chains him up and then uses him, and won't even let him touch her, which is the exact scene that happens in Seven Beauties with the Nazi in Pasqualino.
Yep. Except for one is very into it and one is completely not. But yes, it's the same sort of drive, maybe, or
well,
I don't know.
One is objectively the least sexy sex scene ever, and one is like actually pretty sexy.
And I will say too that I love how, well, in the cut, first of all, is extremely tactile. I don't know that I've ever seen a movie where it's exceptionally sensory. You can feel it. Like there's a kineticism, if that's a word, to it. Like rain on the window, and just, I don't know, it evokes so much just sensory awareness. But then the relationship between her and Mark Ruffalo, who is so hot in this movie that I won't even address it.
He's so hot.
Except to say that.
And he's such a dirtbag.
It's ridiculous. I know. But their relationship, beginning with him being dangerous and her being sort of moth to flame, is sort of another critique in a way, I think, where it's flipping the femme fatale thing, because he's not attracted to her because she's dangerous. It's the other way. And that's not something that we often see unless it's very like 50 Shades of Grey baloney. I prefer when it's more grounded and there is something to that, even though she obviously wants to be safe and cared for.
Totally.
So I don't know exactly what Campion is getting at ultimately, other than, like you said, showing two sides of something.
Yeah, I mean, well, you said that you didn't like the third act of this. Did you find that you liked it on a rewatch?
I liked it a lot more this time. I just think that it's kind of like I just saw The Fall Guy with Ryan Gosling and Emily Blunt, and I really wish it had just been a rom-com and not been completely action centric and focused so much on the stuntman aspect, because the best part of it was that relationship. It's the same within the cut. The serial killer motif, I felt like, wasn't needed for the movie to be just as good. And so the third act, to me, where it's like, oh, this is the killer and this is why, it just seemed, and then trying to string us along and think that it's Ruffalo, felt to me like we just didn't need this many layers of plot. I felt like, and that's why I can't give it like the perfect rating, even though I really, really like it.
I totally feel that. It's funny. I think, and I agree with you. I think honestly, if the serial killer was never addressed, and he was just sort of this thing that was like looming around them as they were just working out whatever was happening between them, I think this would be a stronger film for that. Though I think it's an adaptation of a book anyhow, so maybe her hands were like a little bit tied.
Oh,
but
okay.
I see him as basically being like kind of a metaphor anyhow, and like that he's this sort of, he's a type of guy, and he's really not that different from her own father in that way, that her father is somebody who takes no ownership of his actions, and doesn't acknowledge any consequences, and has left this sort of trail of bodies in his wake, as far as all of, he's had 5 different marriages, and children that are like left feeling broken or feeling discarded. And in a way, Ruffalo is the antidote to that, which is kind of funny, because even though he also is in a broken marriage, he's at least trying. I guess you can give him that. Mm-hmm. Like the guy's he's like a scumbag. I mean, I love that conversation that they have, where it's just like sexist and racist and fat phobic, and you're like, yeah, 2003, like, but it's real. Like there's nothing that's like fake about that conversation. It's deeply awkward, but it's real. But yeah, no, I mean, like, this serial killer who just wants love kind of thing, like it's a kind of guy. And maybe also it ties into that idea of desperation and fantasy, and that, like, this is kind of, again, this movie about the fact that our fantasies are just totally opposed to or reality. Like they don't line up whatsoever. And it's ends up being toxic for everyone. You hurt yourself, you hurt other people.
And there's a great line that Jennifer Jason Leigh says to Meg Ryan's character, which is, because Meg Ryan says, why can't you just imagine doing sexual things with people? Why do you have to actually go out and do it? Why can't you just think about it? And she's like, because that wouldn't be any fun. And that's a profound point here to me, that there's a big distinction between the two sisters, which is one acts on their fantasies because reality is better, and one of them would prefer to, be in her bed and imagine all these things and, do it herself rather than being in a real relationship. And even the way that she and Ruffalo engage together, they are these manufactured scenarios, like driving into the woods and being on the hood of a car. That's not a normal thing, right? But they're trying to manipulate the surroundings so that I think that it appears more fantastical, because these people are in their heads so much that reality has to sort of seem less ordinary in order to be exciting, which is dangerous to think that way.
Totally. And it's weird. I always think it's it's so weird how all of her sex scenes with Ruffalo is always like when she's traumatized. That like that's the time when he
Mhm.
decides this is a good time for sex, and then she sort of goes with it, and it's always a little bit questionable. And I think it does help, it helps you not trust him, to sort of
Mhm.
see the way that how he reacts and deals with things, but it's also not crazy, like this is how people, this is someone's fantasy and someone's idea of like, well, she's upset, so I'll give her something nice, which is sex, like which is, pleasing myself, and her. So that should be enough, and that's fine. And sort of missing like what's actually needed in this scenario is in itself a bit of a nightmare, but um I don't know that any of the characters acknowledge that.
Well, and I think that there's a tremendous lack of intimacy too, because their sex scenes together, it almost seems like it's like they're just mutually getting each other off. There's actually no substance whatsoever. It's just that he's good in bed. And then he has this scene where he describes why he's good in bed. And then at the diner, she says, do you ever tell the truth? Is there any time that you say something that's true? So the relationship is actually quite shallow. It has no depth to it, but then it's portrayed as this passionate, intense thing. And I think that the reason that it feels intense is because they individually feel intensely. That doesn't mean that they're good or that they even work together, because he could be with anybody who happens to think similarly to her and get the exact same result. So that's also an interesting thing that I think women end up doing sometimes, or can do, which is, I don't necessarily love this person or want to be with this person, but they're giving me something that just works, and that can disguise itself as love.
Right. The idea of just like, I mean, the fact that he even proposes to her multiple times, and you're like, on what basis?
And she didn't even know that he was
Right.
married, or I mean, it's absurd. Right. Maybe that's just symbolic of the fact that we just can't get away from that. Like, no matter what we try to do, we all sort of want the same thing at the end of the day.
Or even just like going through the motions of what we think must be the next step, which I think is like what leads
Hmm.
to many divorces in the US, is like, yeah, like this
Expectations.
idea that, well, we've been dating for 3 years and so we have to get married now. Like that's the next move, but like it's it's not, like it isn't. Like there's nothing, that's really compelling you to do that other than peer pressure.
It literally is. I don't know. Have you seen the movie Trust by Hal
Yes,
Hartley?
but it's been a while.
I just watched that a couple of days ago, and one of the things that really struck me about it is that the main character, Maria, does not do anything according to what would be expected of someone in that scenario. Like, she gets pregnant from her high school boyfriend. She has an abortion. She could have dated this guy that she just met who said that he was going to take care of her and everything. And she's like, nope, I don't want to marry you. I'm not having this kid. And it ends with her just standing in the middle of the street by herself. And it seems radical to me that we're ever given a character who's like, nope, I don't want to get married. I don't want to have a kid. Like, even part of that would be radical, but she goes through a series of several things that are like that. And it's not to say that I'm trying to say that either one is good or bad. It's just that we don't really see a lot of it represented of a different side. I'm not trying to advocate one way or the other. I'm just saying, it's kind of refreshing to see a different take on romance or love that doesn't feel so prescribed, like you're
Yeah,
saying.
totally. I mean, I think then that's maybe what both of these movies have in common in a weird way, is that this idea of just bucking the system and showing something that feels radical, whether it is or isn't, because it's just so different from what our expectations are, and it's so different from what we end up seeing traditionally on screen, that they're, like in The Cut was received so poorly. It got such horrible reviews,
Mhm.
and I do not understand that whatsoever. I mean, like, other than the fact that, you get a bunch of, I think, especially in 2003, male reviewers that are just don't get it. They don't understand it and they don't see it because they don't have to live it. Whereas it's funny, you look on like Letterboxd, for example, even like Rotten Tomatoes, which who cares? But
Yeah. Yeah.
30%, I think even the audience rating is 30%, but Rotten Tomatoes, like the user base is largely male. And so if you look at Letterboxd, which I think is a little more evenly split, or at least getting closer to with female reviewers, the rating is like way high. It's like 4 stars or something. So yeah, I mean, like there is something to that. And there's something that, I don't know, I've always had to, for myself, just in how I sort of own my own femininity, because I've always sort of struggled with that, because I never, even as a little kid, I rejected quite a bit of what was expected of me, especially about, appearances and what I liked. And I always hated the like pink is for girls, blue is for boys kind of stuff. It like drove me absolutely crazy. And it took me honestly till I was like in college to realize that, you know what, like if I like something, then it's feminine because I'm a female. Doesn't matter, it's like
Yeah.
whatever the hell I want is totally valid, and there's nothing that can tell me otherwise. And so, people can disagree with me, but this is my version of it, and this is who I am. And I think that you see that in like Jane Campion a lot. You see that in Wertmüller, and I appreciate that in all of these sort of female directors that. And there's a good argument, as we were saying before, there's a good argument about to say that, like, well, you're bucking convention only to conform to male convention. I think that that's not an unfounded criticism, but there is still something that is very unique about their version of male filmmaking that I think makes in itself, becomes female and becomes its own separate, interesting entity.
Yeah, and Campion is totally focused on this, like Holy Smoke, which also was like a huge flop. And that's all about Kate Winslet's self-actualization, her characters, and then the piano, of course, is totally female centric, but it's trying to, I think it's both like trying to understand the nature of female desire specifically, but then also how do you untangle that from how you're seen? I like the quote that you said at the beginning of this, which was, that we are watching being watched, basically. And I don't know that any amount of an analysis of that would lead us to a different state. I think that we're always going to be doing that to a certain extent, and not that it's a choice, but perhaps the best way around that, per se, or so to say, would be that we don't minimize our worth as a result of that. Like it's not something that makes us less than. It's just a reality that we can actually rise above.
Right. I think the acknowledgement of it is like step one, and then from there, then you can start to pull apart, like, why do I feel this about? When I look in the mirror and I think, you're fat. Is it because
right.
I am? Like, no, it's because I am just, told that this is, that there's only one version of thin, or beautiful. And which is interesting because now that we're, so social media heavy, which neither of these films, 2003, obviously we were all online, but like, I feel like it's gotten only worse and intensified significantly since, on Facebook maybe just existed in 2003.
2007,
okay, yeah.
I think, because that's when, I think it was like 2006, 2007,
right.
because I was in college.
Yeah, I had it in college was when it showed up. And I don't know if it like, but that was like the beginning of the end. That's when now everybody is watching themselves, right? Like we can't look every single photo that we post to our Instagram is a shrine to ourselves. It's always about reflecting back. What is it that I want to tell people about me? I always used to get really upset with Facebook when especially women that I knew would make their profile pictures of them with their boyfriend or their husband. And sometimes the thing would even crop it so they were off to the side and the boyfriend was centered. And I used to drive me crazy because I was like, this is a shrine to yourself. This is like a straight up shrine that you've made, has your name on it. It's all about you. And then here's the picture where you're not even the main character in your own temple that you've built to yourself,
Mm-hmm.
you know? And so, like, I think people have now even gone further to the fact that we're just like, we are more in love with ourselves on the internet than we are even in person, that we sort of like aren't developing certain parts of our personalities to exist offline sometimes. Maybe I'm getting too negative about it, but like it's just interesting to me. It's interesting how this perception has shifted so much, and something that I think used to be a little less obvious is now like in the center stage, you know.
I agree completely, and I think that it only feeds into the fantasy world. What it ultimately does is make imaginations stronger and harder to redeem or break or change when confronted with an actual person. That's part of the reason why I wanted to do the podcast in the first place, is because I value what's real more so than what is my, persona on Letterboxd. How do I want, because we're in such control of our image that you can really, if you put a lot of work into it, manipulate how people can see you with them actually ever seeing you, like, or hearing what your voice sounds like or seeing what you look like. It's really just, I don't know. I understand that anonymity, some people enjoy it because they feel like they can be their true selves or whatnot. But stripping away that layer and then seeking validation so intensely, I don't understand how that validation can be meaningful when the person has no idea who you are. I don't know. That's just my opinion, because it's totally manufactured.
No, absolutely.
And maybe there's something that I don't understand about it or something that I'm missing, but I don't want to be anonymous because I want to be liked for who I am. And I cannot be liked for who I am if I'm like a puppeteer that is just completely pulling the strings in either direction so that you'll like me more. And it's not even me. It's me, whatever this ideal version of me is. And it's ultimately, that's so empty. It's just not satisfying.
I mean, I would probably go as far as to say the worst version of that kind of person is just somebody that probably just actively hates themselves, like that they have no sense of self-worth. And so the only way that they can find that validation is by creating a brand new persona or by removing themselves from it in order to feel something that they think is as close to love or, validation, acceptance. As they can get. And likely they didn't receive that at home to whatever degree. But I mean, that said, like, I don't think that just because your username isn't your like real name that you're like, have never experienced love.
No.
But
no, I don't think so either. It's more just like, I think that it's easier to hide and, be able to control how you're perceived when you don't put yourself out there. I don't mean that it's bad for everyone, obviously, but there's degrees of like, I don't know. It reminds me of there's a quote by Richard Rohr that's like, we need more and more of what doesn't work. So a person who is really desperately wanting to be liked and, is a people pleaser to other people so that they'll like them, it's bottomless. There is no satisfaction. Like you have to do it more because it's not working for you, because it's not you. And we all, I think, bottom line, want to be liked for ourselves, not for an image that we're projecting. So it's tearing down your deepest desire before you even can get to it.
Well, I think, it's like I think I said to you before about the fact that I find that I like to watch movies that I dislike sometimes more than movies that I love, because it tells me more about myself. It makes me realize like
Right.
what boundaries and what things are there that frustrate me. And sometimes I straight up have the rom-com reaction of, I hated this movie and it made me so angry and I thought about it for days. And then now suddenly I'm like, oh crap, it's really good. I've had that happen to me so many times where I realized like the thing that frustrated me was really more of my own expectations of what I wanted out of this than what I was being given. And once I sort of accepted what was actually there, it opened up all of these interesting doors. And I think like at the point in which you're thinking about something for multiple days, then it's already won, like it's already, there's something that's
Right.
resonating with you, versus like a movie that, I mean, movies that I love, ideally that's something that's also resonating, but sometimes it feels more validating than it does difficult, and it feels a little easier, which is that's not it's not bad whatsoever. It's wonderful when you find a movie that you adore, but it doesn't teach me as much, I guess, and maybe sometimes it'll like solidify something that like you just couldn't find the words for it. But the movies that I've disliked the most, whether I end up liking them in the end or not, are the movies I think that have helped me shape my own voice as an art a film critic, and somebody who has always had strong opinions. You know what I mean? Like it sort of has made me focus a bit more on what it is I'm saying. And I've always been interested, maybe this is all, now I'm getting off on a tangent, but I've always been interested in why it is that I like things and why I don't like things. And I think that's a question that a lot of people don't even want to engage with because they think it's going to stop their like or their engagement with that said thing. But to me, it's just the opposite. I gain so much by realizing what it is that I liked out of this. And it's not always a positive thing. It's not always like In the Cut is such a great example of that, where you're like, why am I so attracted to this guy who's such a scumbag? And I'm not normally attracted to scumbags. I would never in real life, if I met Mark Ruffalo, I would have, in this movie, I would be like, heck no. Like, I don't even know that I would have made it after that first date, like when she walks out on him, I'm like, good, like, go girl.
Yeah,
They're
they were
awful,
being terrible to her.
and so that's
Yeah.
not something that
Yeah.
like in real life, I would never do that. But there is a weird fantasy there where clearly something's working for me because he's like so attractive in this movie.
Yes. And it could really just be Mark, but I agree with you. I understand that's it all comes back to this like obsession we have with self-definition and saying, I think we're always like you're describing. I have this exact same experience with film that you're describing where it's like, what do I like? What do I not like? What does that say? And it's an interesting thing because I feel like we're always trying, even in relationships, to say, this is me and this is not me. Like this thing, I'm going to take this into myself and use this as part of my identity. And it could even be like what you think of yourself, not even that you're trying to define what others think of you. You're just trying to define yourself to yourself,
Totally.
right? So I think that the best use of this, if you consider it a good thing, the ability to consume art in a way that causes deep reflection, I think the most use you can get out of that is if you can sort of harness that energy into a way that other people through your reading or your conversation can take that and contemplate something about themselves and get meaning out of that, or it causes them to reflect, then it's not just this self-possessed, self-absorbed bubble that we're in, but it actually extends into something that could be beneficial or illuminating for someone else. So I think we're in danger of just being totally selfish almost all the time. And if we aren't sort of self-aware of that, then we're pretty insufferable.
100%. And I mean, like, there's nothing easier. And the fact that like we know that life is only going to bring us more hardships, right? There's no way to get out of unscathed from living. But what's easier than having 2 hours of discomfort to like process some stuff that maybe in the end you're like, I didn't need this movie to know that I can't stand any of this. Great. Now you can like put a
Great.
a bow on it. You never have to go back into this world ever again. Like you've learned something. I think that's worthwhile. And for me especially, I don't know. I really you can, and that's, this even gets into just like the basics of like what makes movies so great. To me, it's just this ability to live 1,000 lives, like to have these experiences in a very, in a, it's absolutely not one for one, like you watch a movie about war, that's nothing
Right.
like being in war. But if you watch enough movies and you read enough books and you talk to enough people and you start to get a sense of what this is like, then you're going to have a much more, a pointed opinion when you start to talk about it. And if you see these things happening in real life, now you can process it a little bit better or on a higher level than when you're just sort of reacting, well, that's good and that's bad. And, period. That's all there is to it.
Totally. Well, Jenna, I have a feeling that we could talk for another hour. So I thank you so much. This is really wonderful food for thought. I think this is perhaps the most interesting double feature that I've ever done to date. And I wasn't entirely sure that it would work because this is the first time that I picked the film as an answer to yours without seeing yours first. So I'm really glad that they were a good combination and at least an interesting one. And I hope that everybody checks you out on Cinema 60. It's been such a pleasure to have you here. I'm very honored, and I hope everybody watches these movies and is uncomfortable.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Amy, for watching these movies that one of which you hated, and I love that. And I'm sorry I wasn't on purpose, but I'm glad that you stuck with it. And thank you for being so insightful and wonderful and inviting me to your great podcast.
It's my pleasure. Thank you so much, and we'll see you at the movies.